All right, this is the video to go over your practice test for your test later this week. So have that out in front of you, have something to grade with, because we'll go over this and you should correct any mistakes you make, or you should kind of fill in some blanks if you were not sure what to do with the problem. But remember, the two big skills on this test are knowing how to use the standard algorithm when doing division. That's a fancy way of saying you got to be able to long divide. Got to use the long division process. So when you see standard algorithm, think about that. That's the first big component on your test, is knowing how to divide by two-digit numbers, one-digit numbers, and things like that. And then the other skill that comes up later in your test would be that of division. Okay, the addition of division, subtraction, multiplication, division. So you want to kind of know those things going into your test. Let's go over this now and keep track of your work, make corrections, and learn from your mistakes so that as we get closer to your test this week, you can improve on your performance. All right, so the first one, find the quotient using the standard algorithm. Show all work in the space provided. All right, so here's the problem, 409 divided by 15. So again, we want to do long division. Now this is the one problem that you're okay to pretty much get a remainder, all right? So it is okay to get a remainder on this one. And the test, it's the same way. If they give you a problem like this, a remainder is okay. We'll talk later about the division part because sometimes they want you to keep going and not stop at the remainder. So we'll talk about the difference of when it's okay to have your remainder and when it's okay to keep going, or when you should keep going. So on this one right here, I actually solved it though, and I did the decimal answer of it. I mean, if you do 409 divided by 15, if you stop at the remainder, you'd really get 27 remainder 4. You would have stopped right about here, okay? Now, if you put a decimal point and kept going, something interesting happens. You keep going and going and going and going and adding zeros and bringing them down, and you keep getting a repeating number up here, and that's what that 6 is. So for this one right here, I would accept both of these. I would accept 27 remainder 4. Or if you were using decimals, I would accept 27.26. And then you put a bar over the 6 because that's what's repeating, right? That 6 will keep happening because 15 keeps going into 100 6 times, and then another 100 6 times, and that's where it repeats. So that's how the number 1 turns out. Again, remainders were okay for a problem like that. Number 2, you spent a whole bunch of money on 11 tickets for a rock concert. Lost a spot. How much did you spend on each ticket? Use the standard algorithm to find your answer. Again, use long division. Find your answer. So for this one right here, 748 divided by 11. I mean, you spent almost 800 bucks on 11 tickets, and we want to know the cost of each ticket. So if you do a long division, well, 11 goes into 74 6 times. You subtract, you get 8. Bring down the next 8, and 11 goes into that 8 times, and we get a remainder of 0. So each ticket was $68 exactly. Now you can always check your work. If you did 68 times 11, you should get 748. So this is one where you can check your work and see if you're accurate or not. Because remember, on your test, no calculators. So double checking is always a good thing. Number 3, you had to see which of these were true or false. There we go. All right, let's start with the second one because I just gave you the answer. If you do 64 times 7, you get 448. There's my work to show that. If you do this division problem, you get 450. And those are not the same answers, so we would say that is false. All right. The second one, however, actually the top one, 125 times 7. Well, if you multiply 125 times 7, you can see my work way to the left. Over here, you get 875. And if you do the division right here, you will also get 875. There's my work. You can check it yourself, but if 875 is the same as this one's answer, those are true, okay? And these ones were false because we got different answers. Number 4, Chris divides his money among his 6 kids to spend on gifts. His daughter adds 10 bucks to her portion, and then uses the money to buy 4 gifts that cost the same amount. What was the price of each of Mindy's gifts? All right, so the first thing we know is that Chris divides his money among his 6 kids. So let's start with that. He does some division. His money divided by 6. Each kid gets 32 bucks. That's what the first step kind of establishes. Now, look at the second sentence. His daughter, Mindy, adds 10 bucks to her portion. Well, she got 32 bucks from dad. She adds 10 more. So now she's got 42 bucks. All right, so she maybe had 10 bucks in her piggy bank or her wallet, but now she has 42 bucks total. Dad's 32 plus the 10 she had. And then she uses that money, the 42 bucks, to buy 4 gifts that cost the same amount. So if we divide that 42 by 4, that's what we do over here, 42 divided by 4. Okay, now if you go through your long division or your standard algorithm, you end up with 10.5, which we know in money, 10.5 is really $10.50. So that's how much she spent on each of the gifts, $10.50. Number 5, 6, 7, and 8, you had to do lots of decimal work here. I'm going to remind you, with decimals, you got to know what to do depending upon the operation. When we add and subtract, we line up our decimal points. And subtraction, you got to make sure you borrow. Okay, just keep in mind, line them up and borrow. But with multiplication and division, they have kind of special rules. You got to kind of ignore the decimal points when you multiply. You multiply like normal. And then when you get your answer, you come back and you say, well, I have 3 decimal numbers. I have 2 decimal numbers. That's a total of 5 decimal numbers. So I'm going to move my decimal point to the left 5. That's what you do when you multiply. Okay, you don't really line them up. You really ignore them until you get to your answer. And when you're dividing, you have to make sure your divisor is a whole number. So you bump it to the right of your number. And then if you do that 1 space, then you move this one 1 space. So you're creating a new problem that has a whole number out here. And then you can do long division, and your decimal point comes up, and you don't stop until you get a remainder of 0. So you want to keep in mind these rules for all 4 steps here. Number 5 was addition. So you want to line up your decimal points. You might need to plug in some zeros because that 7 is only 1 decimal number, and over here I have 3 decimal numbers. So I kind of put some zeros to balance my problem out. And then I add like normal, and I get 213 and 559 thousandths. Number 6 was multiplying. So again, you ignore your decimal points. In this one, they actually lined up, but that's not important. I think of this as 3,159 times 356. And I go through all of my multiplication steps. The 6 times all of those, the 5 times all of those, and the 3 times all of those. And then when I get my answer, here's how I know I have 2 decimal numbers here and 2 decimal numbers here. So that's a total of 4 decimal numbers. So I move it over 4 spaces from the right, and I end up with 112.4604. Number 7 and 8, that was subtraction and division. So the subtraction, again, you want to line things up. You're subtracting, so line up your decimal points, and it'll come straight down at the end. But I also have to add in some zeros here because that 52.8, there's a couple slots that are missing a number, so I want to plug in a 0 to kind of keep me honest when I subtract, because I can't do 0 minus 4. So I have to go borrow, and eventually that's going to kind of change some of those numbers up there. And I end up with almost 38, 37.926. And the final one, dividing, remember, the first number goes inside, and the second number is your divisor, 1.6, that goes outside. So that's step 1, is just setting it up right. But then step 2 is making this a whole number. So bump this to the right 1 space, which turns that into 16. And since this moves 1 space, this one moves 1 space, and it ends up in between the 3 and the 6. All right. So then I do my long division problem. I go through 16 to 33, that's 2 times. I get 32, and I keep going with long division. Now, eventually something's going to happen where I get a remainder right here. So I have to add a 0 at the back of the 6 and keep going until I don't get a remainder anymore, which will be the next step, really. And my decimal point will come straight up in the end, 210.85. So that's the division 1. Now, those were pretty much your study guide problems. Just to remember, you have 2 big skills: long division and then decimal operations. And that's what you're going to be, assessed over on this quiz. So thanks for watching. We'll take it from there.